It was just after 11 when Sarah Morales pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Hillcrest Inn. The neon sign buzzed weakly above the entrance, half the letters darkened by burnt-out bulbs. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, exhausted from another 12-hour shift at the county hospital. This was her third rotation in as many weeks, each one in a different town, each one bleeding into the next with the same fluorescent corridors and the same tired faces. The night clerk barely looked up as she checked in. A young man, early 20s, scrolling through his phone behind a scratched plexiglass partition. He slid a key card across the counter. Room 313, third floor, elevators on the left. His voice was flat, rehearsed. Sarah thanked him and dragged her overnight bag toward the elevator, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the linoleum. The hallway on the third floor smelled of industrial cleaner and something faintly sour, like old carpet that had been shampooed too many times. Room 313 was at the far end, tucked into a corner near the emergency exit. Sarah unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small but clean. Recently renovated, it seemed. Fresh paint on the walls, new bedding, a flat-screen television mounted above a narrow desk. The air conditioning hummed quietly, filling the silence with white noise. She dropped her bag on the luggage rack, kicked off her shoes, and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress was firm, the pillows stiff. She scrolled through her phone briefly. A few missed texts from friends, a reminder about her next shift. Then set it on the nightstand and closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dreamless. But sometime after 2 in the morning, Sarah woke. At first, she didn't know why. The room was dark, the only light a faint glow from the digital clock on the nightstand. Then she heard it, saw a sound, muffled and distant, coming from somewhere above her, or maybe beside her. It was hard to tell, a soft, rhythmic sound, almost like crying. A woman's voice, quiet and broken, as if someone were weeping into a pillow. Sarah sat up slowly, listening. The sound seemed to come from the vent near the ceiling, the one connected to the neighboring room. She waited, holding her breath. The crying continued for several minutes, then faded into silence. She lay back down, unsettled, but too tired to investigate. Maybe someone next door was having a rough night. It happened. People carried their pain with them, especially in places like this. The next evening, after another long shift, Sarah returned to room 313. She asked the night clerk about the room next door. 314 or 312, whichever was connected to hers. The clerk glanced at his computer screen, then shook his head. No one's checked in next to you. Those rooms are still under renovation. Closed off. He said it matter-of-factly, already looking back at his phone. Sarah frowned but didn't press further. Maybe she'd been mistaken about where the sound was coming from. That night, the crying returned. Louder this time, more distinct. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sobs drifting through the vent. It wasn't just crying. There were words, fragmented and unclear, as if someone were pleading softly. Please. Help. Please. The voice was thin, desperate, almost childlike. Sarah's chest tightened. She got out of bed and stood beneath the vent, straining to hear more clearly. But as soon as she approached, the sound stopped. She tried to sleep, but unease gnawed at her. Something about the voice felt wrong, not just sad, but hollow, as if it were coming from somewhere far away. She thought about calling the front desk again, but what would she say? That she heard crying from a room that was supposedly empty? They'd think she was hearing things. Maybe she was. Night shifts did that to you sometimes. Scrambled your sense of reality. On her third night at the Hillcrest Inn, Sarah decided to record the sound. She set her phone on the nightstand, camera facing the ceiling, and turned on the voice recorder before lying down. She waited, her body tense, her ears straining for any hint of noise. And then, just past midnight, it came again. The crying. Softer now, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, weeping quietly, desperately, as if no one had heard her for a very long time. Sarah didn't move. She let the phone record, her heart pounding in the darkness. The crying lasted nearly 10 minutes before it faded into silence once more. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling slightly, and played back the recording. At first, there was nothing. Just the hum of the air conditioning, the faint creak of the building settling, then a voice, but not the one she'd heard. This voice was clearer, closer, and achingly familiar. It was her own, whispering, pleading, barely audible but unmistakable. "Please, help me, please." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She replayed it again, and again. The voice was hers, but she hadn't spoken. She had been lying in bed, silent, listening. How could the recording contain her voice? She sat frozen, the phone clutched in her hand, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the vent, trying to make sense of what she'd heard. In the morning, she checked out early, mumbling something to the clerk about a change in her schedule. He barely acknowledged her, already scrolling through his phone again. But the Hillcrest Inn did not forget Sarah Morales. 2 days later, the housekeeping staff entered room 313 to prepare it for the next guest. The door was unlocked, the room silent. The bed was neatly made, corners tucked with almost military precision. Sarah's overnight bag was gone. Her shoes were gone, but her phone remained on the nightstand, screen dark, battery nearly dead. The housekeeper picked it up, intending to turn it in to Lost and Found. That's when she noticed it was still recording. The timestamp showed it had been running for nearly 48 hours. Curious, she tapped the screen. The recording was still active, the camera pointed directly at the mirror above the desk. She pressed play on the most recent footage. At first, there was nothing unusual. Just an empty room, the mirror reflecting the bed, the nightstand, the door. But then, faintly in the reflection, a figure appeared, standing near the vent. A woman, her back to the camera, her shoulders shaking as if she were crying. The housekeeper leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The woman in the mirror turned slowly, and for a brief, terrible moment, her face came into view. It was Sarah, but her eyes were wrong, hollow, distant, as if she were looking through the mirror rather than at it. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the figure in the reflection spoke. "Please, help me. Please." The housekeeper dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking but still recording. She backed out of the room, her hands trembling, and immediately called the manager. Police were summoned. They reviewed the footage, interviewed the staff, searched the hotel from basement to roof. There was no sign of Sarah Morales. No evidence of foul play, no forced entry, no struggle. Just a neatly made bed, a cracked phone, and a recording that no one could fully explain. Investigators pulled the hotel's blueprints. Room 313 had been renovated recently, they learned after years of complaints from previous guests. Guests who reported hearing crying in the walls. Guests who woke in the night feeling watched. One former employee mentioned that the room had been sealed off for nearly a decade before the renovations. Something about structural issues or maybe plumbing. No one seemed certain. When they pried open the wall behind the vent, they found it. A narrow crawl space, barely large enough for a person to crouch in. Dusty, forgotten, filled with remnants of old wiring and insulation, and scratched into the wood beams, dozens of messages, dates, initials, desperate pleas for help. Some were decades old, others were recent, and among them, in fresh lettering, were Sarah's initials. SM, and beside them, a single word. Heard. The room was sealed again, permanently this time. The hotel management claimed it was due to structural concerns. Guests were no longer assigned to the third floor's corner rooms. But late at night, when the hallways are empty and the building settles into silence, the housekeeping staff still report hearing it. A faint, muffled crying, drifting through the vents, always from the rooms that are supposed to be empty. And sometimes, when they pass by room 313, they hear a voice. A woman's voice, soft and pleading, asking for help that never comes. Sarah Morales was never found. Her family filed a missing person report, but the trail ended at the Hillcrest Inn. Her car remained in the parking lot for weeks before it was towed. Her belongings were eventually shipped to her parents, who mourned a daughter who had simply vanished into the night. Even today, travelers still check into the Hillcrest Inn, drawn by cheap rates and convenient locations. Most never notice anything unusual. But a few, those assigned to rooms near the third floor corner and those who arrive late and sleep lightly, wake in the darkness to the sound of crying. And when they try to record it, they hear only their own voices, whispering for help in rooms that should be empty. Room 313 is not just a number on a door. It is a trap, a space between walls where something waits patiently, listening, echoing, and pulling those who hear it into a silence from which they never return. And for those who remember Sarah Morales, the lesson remains. Not all cries for help come from the living, and sometimes the voice you hear in the dark is the one you're about to become.